Hey, this is Tony Boss Bolin coming to you from the Lincoln Addict Podcast.
Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's Jason, ODB Ballard, the Lincoln Addict, back with another episode of Lincoln Addict Podcast, and I want to thank the return listeners/viewers, if you're on YouTube, for coming back. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing. It's free content. We cover so much as it relates to the 60s Lincoln universe, as I often refer to as the Lincolnverse. Okay, so if you saw the thumbnail or the title of this episode, you may have noticed that the main topic is going to be Goldfinger. So on this episode, I will break down the car crushing scene from the 1964 beloved film Goldfinger. We will also look at some of the filming locations, including in South Florida. There may be some information that we uncover on this episode that wasn't previously discussed. I think there's some of the information that's been out there may not be 100% accurate, so we will look at that as well. We will also discuss several aspects of the film, including some of the Ford product placement. Now, one thing I want to reinforce is the other reason why I'm covering this beloved film at this time. Of course, I live here in Central Florida, but this film production, principal photography, kicked off the week of January 20th through the 24th in 1964. So here in Florida, of course, in South Florida, the Miami area, the production team was here filming January of 64 for this film later to come out with a premiere in September of 64. And it didn't actually premiere in the U.S. until December, but it did have a world premiere in September of 64. So we're going to celebrate together the 60th anniversary of the Florida kickoff for principal photography. Now, this is a beloved film, as I mentioned. Rest in peace, Sean Connery. Rest in peace, Ian Fleming, the creator of this beloved 007 character, if you will. But I've always been intrigued by these films, and it's ironic that we're talking about this film primarily because of the Lincoln. If you haven't heard, there is a famous car crushing scene, and the sequence involves a car leaving a filming location and then driving to a scrapyard, a metal scrapyard. So again, we'll break that down. Now, if you haven't seen the film and you intend to watch it, definitely want to issue this spoiler alert. We're going to kind of share some information. Not so much, it's not going to mess up the plot of the film, but it's one of the famous scenes, again, that involves the Lincoln Continental. We'll talk a little bit about that location. And again, I think we'll get to the bottom of a misnomer, if you will, related to where the actual car crushing scene took place. Now, in addition to that topic, I will cover the normal lead-in topics for the podcast, which includes just talking about what's going on in the Lincoln world and what I've got going on with my 64 and my 65 Lincoln, plus other topics. So certainly stick with us till the end. I really appreciate that. Now, a few things that have been going on that I'll just give a quick heads up. I want to give a shout out to the Suicide Kings, as well as the Cadillac Kings. They got together in January this month to get together for a cruise. A lot of different car clubs, lowrider clubs, solo riders, so on and so forth. They get together in January to kind of signify the new year, and they do a car cruise. And it was really cool to see all of the Suicide Kings do that. Of course, the Cadillac Kings as well, so they kind of called that, I believe, King Fest, which I thought was awesome. And I know a lot of the Raddies showed up, the Lincoln Life folks, as well as different solo riders. It seemed like it was a jam-packed house, so congrats to them. We'll talk a little bit more about that. In addition, we'll talk about Mecum, which just concluded here about an hour and a half from me. I did not get to go this year as I had hoped. I had some other things going on. I had some friends attend. And if you have an opportunity on this channel, I did a preview as well as a wrap-up as it relates to the Lincoln Continentals from the 60s that sold at Kissimmee Mecum. I will link to the wrap-up video at the end. Now, coming up here the next week to 2 weeks, There is going to be, of course, the world famous Barrett Jackson, which is held in Scottsdale, Arizona, that actual Scottsdale event, if you will. They have several throughout the year. And the Scottsdale really is the flagship event, is my understanding. There's a few cars that we'll be watching. I haven't done the preview yet of those cars, but I know Ali is bringing a really nice Retro Mod car. We're very anxious to see what transpires with that sale, so we'll talk a little bit about that on this episode. I want to thank our 2 title sponsors, including Devious Customs. If you are in the market to customize your Lincoln, or down the road you're looking at maybe purchasing a Lincoln to customize, surely make your first stop Devious Customs. You can visit deviouscustoms.com and go under Shop Lincolns. There's products ranging from air suspension to car audio to gauges to even window switches. So even if you're not looking to really alter the look and feel of your vehicle for the most part, I guarantee Jeff's got something that could potentially help you with your car. In addition to that, I'm standing next to my 1964 Lincoln Continental convertible that I refer to as Smuggler's Blues, or Project Smuggler's Blues, and I want to thank Michael and team at Colorado Custom. I've been a Colorado Custom wheel fan for probably 30 years, going back to my truck days, which I love these wheels. I love this company. Michael and team produce many wheels and steering wheels and other parts, but you may not know that they actually produce a replica Lincoln wheel. So it looks just like the wheel cover, also known as a hubcap, and you could purchase those right through coloradocustom.com. The great thing is you're not going to have hubcaps flying off anymore if you go with these awesome Colorado Custom wheels. They range in sizes. I run a 17-inch wheel that looks fantastic, but of course you can get much larger. Hit up Michael and the team at coloradocustom.com. So with that being said, we've got the housekeeping out of the way. We've got the little bit of the overview. What I'd like to do is I'm going to jump in here. You're going to see I'll go a little bit smaller on the screen, and I will talk through some of the items, and then other times I'll appear a full screen. So without further ado, thank you guys so much for the continued support. If you want to leave a thanks, please leave a comment, certainly. And you can visit LincolnAddict.com for shirts, stickers, and other ways to listen. Stay on the rise, everyone. Let's jump into episode 36, Goldfinger and Lincoln Continentals.
All right, so let's jump into this episode. I want to give a shout out to the Ratties, the homies from California. You should follow them on Instagram, the RATTYS Ratties. Also, huge shout out to Emma and the team at Mob Steel. They, of course, have their brand, Detroit Steel Wheel Co. Good people. And if you're looking for a wheel that's like a smoothie type wheel that's made out of steel and not aluminum, they can get you squared away. So there's really a jam-packed episode. What I'm going to try to do, though, I'm going to try to keep my segment a little bit shorter. And I don't mean it's going to be 2 minutes. I'll try to shorten this segment up because there's a ton of content that I have already on the backside that's related to Goldfinger. So we'll get to that. I want to thank Devious Customs. The episode overview is brought to you by Devious Customs, as I mentioned at the beginning. And again, this episode, we're going to talk about Goldfinger, so more on that. So Lincoln Life updates in general, I want to say this. I spoke with a gentleman by the name of Tim Wilson. And Tim, just a fantastic Lincoln enthusiast, just a wonderful guy to talk to on the phone. And I do hope, he did say that he'd be willing to come on as a guest. He has an original 1964 Lincoln Continental sedan that has roughly 2,000 miles on it. Original documented miles. Okay, there's a cool story. I've hinted at some of that story via social media. I posted the black 64 with red interior. I will say this, Tim doesn't just have that 164 sedan. He also has, I think it's a pair of 61. So just a really good guy, someone that was super excited to talk with me. I was more excited, I think, to talk with him. And he showed a lot of love to just Lincoln Addict social media channel. And he really just was he was impressed, I think, with the curated content, which again is always my first thing. I never really want to be first to post something, or I never really want to be, someone that, is literally on my phone 24/7, 365. I think I'm on it enough. But my whole goal really with this hobby, as I said at the beginning as well, or I'll say it throughout here, it's a hobby for me. So I do this for fun. I do it because I like this stuff. I do it. I like that time period. And, I've talked a little bit about that, but I want to say again, thanks to Tim Wilson for taking the time. Most importantly, thanks to Chris Dunn for linking us up. Chris is just a pillar in the Lincoln community, and he's been doing this stuff for so long. Obviously, there's a lot of other people too, and I want to highlight those folks, the folks at the LCOC, that the folks that put together some of the regional publications, including the Lincoln Continental Comments. That's been around a long time. I've got a lot more coming on that. But I do think that this podcast and this channel will continue to grow, and it's because of people like Jim Ayers that's always looking out, and so many others. And here locally, TC, Blair, Chris Dunn, John Cashman's looked out before on stories, and we'll text here and there. So shout out to John. Just so many people. And if you know me, and if you haven't figured this out already, I'm all about giving credit. Okay, I'm never going to be like, oh, I knew all this stuff. I just woke up one day and I knew it all. That's not who I am. If you remember writing a paper for school, you had to credit who you wrote, right? Typically journalists, right? Good journalists, they have to, they have to source things. Obviously, sometimes there's things that are off the record, but you know what I mean? It's for me, although this is a hobby, I take it serious and I like doing it. And who knows how long I'll do it for. I do intend to do more through my Substack. So if you want to find me on Substack, it's ODBS, so ODB's Life. And I've touched a little bit upon Lincoln, so I'm going to touch some more on there. But I think like in conjunction with Substack, this podcast, this YouTube channel, the social media channels, some of the stuff, I'm a hands-on guy. I don't do everything myself. Tony, my friend, helps me a ton. But certainly, like I've always said, I try to be as well-rounded as I can. But at the end of the day, it is a hobby. So getting back to it, Tim Wilson, thank you so much. Great guy. I think we'll be able to tell his story here soon, or let him tell his story. And I can't wait to meet you. I do plan on coming up. I think you told me it was Cincinnati 2025. There's going to be an event. So I'm looking forward to coming up there. So more on that. King's Fest. What I want to do is I want to show you guys this. So shout out to Suicide Kings and Cadillac Kings. I'm going to share my screen. And what I'm going to tell you to do is on YouTube, go out and follow Suicide Kings. I typed in Suicide Kings Lincolns, or you could type in Suicide Kings Los Angeles, what you see here. Now, I do believe they're going to continue to ramp up their videos. You'll see it's not just those few that I had presented there. Escalante talked a little bit about the guy that they have that edits their videos. He does a great job. I think there's something for everyone in their videos. They're a tight-knit car club community, and they've got some cool stuff coming. Now, the reason why I want to give them a shout-out is, again, they did this thing with they're the Suicide Kings, but there's also the Cadillac Kings. And the significance of that is obviously they decided to get together, and this kind of New Year's Day type deal. They've done Christmas stuff, which you can see here. And I thought it was pretty cool. There's some local guys here in a lowrider club that do a cruise. I didn't go this year. I've went in the past. And I just know no matter where you're at in the world, there's cruises somewhere, and typically near you. And I know California's a big car culture, so it was cool to see the Suicide Kings link up with the Cadillac Kings and do the damn thing. Now, there were solo riders that showed up. As I mentioned at the beginning, there I think Lincoln Life folks, the Raddies. So to me, again, going back to the fact that this is a hobby, I love, coming from the mini truck scene, there were always, these maybe folks that didn't get along or different clubs that didn't get along or whatever. And I think that's potentially in any of the communities for the car communities. But to me, the bottom line is it's so great to see just everybody get together. At the end of the day, we have this one passion. Typically, it's a certain type of car, in this case, Lincolns. Sometimes it's just cars in general. Hence, there's so many car shows in America. So I thought that was pretty cool. But check them out. Also, I wanted to shout them out on Instagram. Now, they've got several chapters. This browser, I'm not logged in. So you'll see on Instagram, you can do Instagram on the computer, but it's way easier on your phone. Download it and just type in Suicide Kings, and you'll see this is, I think, their flagship page, Suicide Kings with an S, CC for Car Club. And then, of course, they've got different chapters. They've got like a Suicide Kings Los Angeles, a NorCal, and I think they've got a NorCal, and they've got one other Coachella Valley, I think it is. But there's several of them, but I think this is the main one. They do a great job. So shout out to Escalante and all the kinfolk. This was their little promo here, which I thought was pretty cool. So good stuff there. Okay, so and actually the Lincoln Life updates, I want to give a huge shout out to the kinfolk at Colorado Custom Wheels. I always promote their wheels. I've had their wheels on other projects. ColoradoCustom.com. They make the Lincoln replica wheels that look just like the hubcaps. And again, these won't go flying off. They do have a center cap that goes over the lug nuts, so it hides it all. And it's a very, very, very high-end machined wheel. These things aren't cheap by any means, but if you've got the resources and you want to get in a set of these wheels, talk to Michael. He's going to ask you all sorts of questions like, are you going to eventually run disc brakes? Are you going to eventually run big brakes? Do you have any modifications to your car? He has a whole database of people that he's already sold these cars to, and he knows what offset you need and things like that. So ColoradoCustom.com, talk to Michael and team. Okay, so the Lincolns for sale, brought to you by our fine folks at Griot's Garage. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I promise, because I did a wrap-up video. What you're seeing here on the screen is Mecum. Mecum they have multiple events. They're a competitor to Barrett-Jackson. They have their Kissimmee event every January. They had a 2020 coach door. Lincoln Continental sell for $95,000. That's the one I'll cover. That's not the 60s. They had this 65 black convertible frame-on restoration, which doesn't really apply to these cars, but $70,400. That is, of course, this includes the fee. The 64 convertible, $47,300. And I think the big surprise here was this 66. So again, you'll see when I do the recap. I won't go into a lot of detail here. The thing I love about this car is it has the Colorado Custom wheels on it with more than likely a diamond-backed white wall. It's a 61 sedan. The sedan prices continue to increase. And I will just tell you this, $66,000 with the fee. That's a strong price for a sedan. Now, I know it's customized. It's got a high-end wheel, Colorado Custom wheel. And, it's probably not perfect, but certainly, people love these four-door Lincolns. People love the convertibles. Not everybody can maybe, afford the price of a convertible these days, but certainly someone got a pretty cool ride there. And I think this was the biggest surprise of the Mecum. As far as my opinion goes, this one didn't sell, the 64 black, so more to come there. Now, next, I want to talk about Scottsdale. So I went to Barrett-Jackson website already. I've already went to the docket for Scottsdale, and then you go to the car docket. Really what I want to touch upon here, because I'm going to do a video that will actually go over this. There are a couple convertibles. So you see this gold 67. This is a neat 66 custom limousine, factory coach built, which would have been Lieben Peterson. They did spell it right with the two N's, which I appreciate. Not a lot of these things were made. This was owned by a blues singer, Jimmy Witherspoon, which is super cool. It's airbagged, custom wheels. It comes with the original wheel covers. 67 convertible. I've seen this car in person. Gary Dobson, I believe is his name. I've met him, and he's a nice guy. This thing is possibly going to go for some big money. It's a 69 sedan. You don't see a lot of the 69s for sale, but this thing has a 4L80E trans, an LS3, so it's a GM drivetrain, a crazy huge offset wheel in the back. So real nice car for someone that wants a custom Lincoln. We'll have to see what it sells for. Now, there's a guy in the truck club that I've been in since 98, Justin. Justin has built a lot of cool cars over the years, and that's kind of his business. And he is no stranger to building cool stuff. He's building this, what I'll call like a goldish color, 64, highly sought after year, of course, a little bit different mirror. Again, I'll go into a deeper dive. This one obviously has custom wheels. It's air suspension. It has a nice offset. I don't know if the rear end has been narrowed at all. It's certainly not perfect, I would say, to most people. But I would say to the majority of people that want a custom Lincoln, this is going to check a lot of boxes for them. The year, a very cool color. Not everyone wants a black Lincoln. Cool wheel offset. It's going to be pretty cool. You got a 63 sedan, blacked out. You have a 61 convertible, 5-year restoration with the original engine. I looked at photos of this car. It doesn't look perfect, but it looks really, really, really nice. And if you say, what do you mean it doesn't look perfect? Look at the heel pad. There's some scratches in it. I guess they maybe tried to dye it, dye the heel pad. But, compared to what we see with a lot of people, or a lot of these cars, it's certainly got a lot going for it. It's got some weird little, I don't remember all of these accents. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's got some things like, where they've done some different exotic interior pieces and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what that car goes for. But the one I wanted to sum it up with is, again, I mentioned this car in the last episode. You have the 64 Lincoln Continental convertible, highly sought after year, make, model, you name it, but this one has a Coyote drivetrain. So Ali, when we had Escalante and friends on, Ali made that guest appearance on Lincoln Addict Podcast, and I kind of said, hey, can you kind of give us a hint of what you got coming for next year? Some of us knew, and this is the car. He's got these custom bucket seats that are made. You've got this crazy drivetrain, air-conditioned car. It's not a GM drivetrain, so it's going to, I think, tickle the fancy of a lot of people. And what you're seeing on the screen here is, again, a highly customized car. You could argue and say, hey, why would you do that? Da, 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 da. Listen, a lot of these cars, people want them to be customized, okay, at the end of the day. So it's their money, and I wish Ali all the best. He's had it also on eBay, which a lot of guys will do. I haven't really talked about that, but people will showcase it, so to speak, on eBay, because you've got a worldwide market, people constantly looking. Of course, you maybe have the high price tag. If someone bought it there, then you don't have to bring it. More than likely, I guess, at the end of the day, well, I don't know if you could sell it, because I think there's rules. I think you sign the title over to them and all that. But not to get into all that, I would just say that, someone probably came and be like, money talks. But more than anything, it's really a way to go, wow, look at this car, and, boom, it's going to be at Barrett Jackson. So I'll do a little bit deeper of a dive on the YouTube channel, as I normally do. And I want to just say the Lincoln's for Sale is brought to you by our friends at Griot's Garage, GRIOTS garage.com. That's Griot's Garage.com. They have amazing detailing products. And someone like myself, I'm not a professional detailer. I'm just kind of the guy that likes to go out on the weekend, wash the car, wipe it down. They've got a ton of products, and they've got a lot of free tech videos on their YouTube channel. So there'll be a link in the description or in the podcast notes. Certainly check it out. Okay, as we get closer to wrapping up this segment, Lincolns and TVs, movies, music videos, plus album covers. Look, I'm not going to pick another one, because this whole episode, most of this episode from here on out, is going to be about Goldfinger, the 1964 amazing film that so many of us love and just a generation grew up watching. That's going to be the main topic of this episode. So really, I didn't go down the bunny trail to find another one. There's a 63 in this film. There's a 64 sedan. There's a 64 convertible. There's a bunch of other Ford products, so we'll talk about that. The Lincolns in the cinema, film, music videos, and album covers is brought to you by our family at Steel Rubber. I often tell you STEELE rubber.com. Family-owned business. If you don't believe us, go back and listen to that episode. Their products are more superior than the competition. And I can tell you this, these cars continue to go up in value. If it was me, I would put steel on all of my cars, and I would keep those receipts because the products are not cheap, but they certainly add value to your car. When you go to sell it, you say, hey, this guy over here, he's selling his Lincoln. You see all the weather stripping. It's all dry rotted. It's all broken. It's not even there. Look at my car. My car's got it all there. Here's all the receipts to show how much I paid for it. So I love all that stuff because it's great products. It's family owned. And I love seeing the owner at SEMA whenever I do go. So shout out to Steel Rubber. Sealed with Steel is the hashtag we always use, and it's STEELE rubber.com. So with that being said, we're going to jump into Goldfinger. We're going to talk mostly about the car crushing scene, and I want to thank AccuAir. I have AccuAir on 2 current vehicles I've owned. I've had it on 4 total vehicles, ACCU Air, AccuAir.com. That is the number 1 source in the world for air management if you have air suspension on your vehicle. And like I always say, you don't have to have a custom lowered vehicle. There's also lifted vehicles, as well as Jeeps now that have air suspension. So when you're off-roading and you want to change the ride height, you can do that. They're going to be rolling out additional kits in the future, my understanding. But AccuAir on social media, on YouTube, as well as, of course, AccuAir.com. There's a ton of videos. There's just cool stuff out there. I love their product, and I'll always be a promoter of it just because I've had great success with it, and I love it. So enough talking ODB. I tried to keep that segment under 20 minutes. I think it's a record for me maybe on this podcast. And with that being said, let's jump into the Goldfinger discussion. Thank you all, and stick with us till the end. I appreciate y'all. Take care.
All right, so thanks for sticking with us up to this point. That was kind of the lead-in, the normal content that I cover. So again, if you're a return listener, you'll be well aware of that. Hopefully you enjoyed that segment. Now we are going to get into the title segment that I talked about at the beginning, and that is breaking down the famous car crushing scene and more information as it relates to the beloved 1964 major motion picture film, Goldfinger. So, thank you guys so much. Just know I do this stuff for fun. I'm not a professional as it relates to a shop or anything like that. I do this solely as a hobby, and I do it because I love these cars, and I appreciate when folks chime in and say, hey, this is great content. I enjoyed it. Maybe you got something out of this. Please leave a comment. Again, it really helps our channel. If you're watching this on your Apple TV and you're like, hey, I can't really leave a comment, go back later on your computer or your smartphone, look up this video, watch it again if you can. And I would like to remind you as well, if you're listening to the audio version of this episode, thank you. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, fantastic. But go back and listen and view via YouTube as well. Not only does it help me out as far as my minutes watched, but it's also going to give you a visual that you will not have on the podcast audio portion of Lincoln Addict Podcast. So hopefully going forward, I'll do all video and audio episodes, and that makes it easier for all different kinds of viewers and listeners. Thank you guys so much. Without further ado, we're going to jump now into the Goldfinger discussion. Shout out to Jeff and team at Devious Customs, as well as Michael and family at Colorado Custom Wheels. Let's do this, y'all.
Hey, so I'm transitioning from out in the shop to the studio here, and I want to jump right in and talk about Goldfinger, as I alluded that I would be touching upon today. There's a lot to talk about. Obviously, I don't want to just talk about the car crushing scene. That is going to be the lion's share. We'll go through that. But what I want to also kind of give a little bit of context of the film and whatnot. I did use the gold Lincoln emblems here, the star, and that came from the 1961, one of the more obscure catalogs. That's kind of harder to find. So I used that along with one of the few that I found movie posters here. You'll see here, I want to give a huge shout out to Lincoln Land. Fine folks there. I certainly appreciate everything that they've always done. And oftentimes, again, people ask me, hey, I need a particular part. And I always refer people, check with LincolnLandInc.com first. They've been around 40 years. And of course, they wouldn't have been in business that long if they weren't doing folks right out there. So certainly give them a shout out. Now, this was just a quick overview that I put together. We're going to talk about key items related to this beloved film. We'll talk about some of the Ford product placement and how that's changed over the course of time. We'll review the filming locations, and I think we're going to uncover something that no one's really talked about. So if you ever plan on visiting this location, as I do, you'll be able to, I believe, go to the right spot. So we'll talk about that. We'll view the car crushing scene together. So I'm going to play that. And I'm also going to play a shortened 1 minute and 50 seconds of the making of. So the making of, there's a few versions I found. I have a 25-minute version, but of course I scaled that down. So I think that 1 minute and 50 seconds will kind of summarize a couple key things. It will also reinforce the fact that the principal photography began January 20th of 1964, 60 years ago. We'll round out the discussion with some facts. We'll talk about, again, where it was filmed, the car switcheroo, was additional magic made, and the drive-away with the Ford Ranchero. I'll also source, typically, if you follow me on social media, you know I try to source everything. Wikipedia, there's various online resources where this stuff is available. Pretty much all it's available. I like to kind of curate it and bring it together to tell the story. That's really what my role is, I think, in this podcast. Of course, the making of Goldfinger is also a great source. Now, Goldfinger, the film is based upon the 1959 novel. It was the 7th novel in the James Bond series. It, of course, was created by Ian Fleming, rest in peace. Now, Goldfinger was produced by Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. So you'll hear that as well in the making of. This was the first of 4, although not in a row. It was the first of 4 that were directed by Guy Hamilton. It opened largely to favorable reception. Now, there are 2, for those scoring at home, many of you may be Bond experts. I'm certainly not that. I do love James Bond films. And there were 2 prior to this film, Dr. No in 62 and From Russia with Love in 63. Goldfinger was the first Bond blockbuster with a budget equal to that of the 2 preceding films. It was about a $3 million budget. Something to keep in mind, I was born in the late 70s, and, being an 80s child for the most part, I think there's often a misconception that blockbuster films didn't come around until Steven Spielberg's with Jaws and E.T. and Back to the Future and Jurassic Park in the 90s and things like that. And that's certainly not the case. You will see here, again, a $3 million budget. The film was a financial success. I'll jump ahead an extra bullet point here. It recouped its budget in 2 weeks, which is fantastic, and it grossed over $120 million worldwide, which is huge. That previous bullet point, this was the first Bond film to win an Academy Award. It was for sound editing. In 1999, it was ranked with the British Film Institute, BFI, as the number 70 out of 100 of the British films. So the release dates. This is of significance because although the principal photography started in January, it gives you some context. So they turned this film around in 6, 7 months, 8 months, if you will. September 17, 1964, it premieres in London. A day later in the United Kingdom. Believe it or not, from all of the online content I was able to find, it looks like it came out December 22nd, 1964 in the U.S. Around that holiday season. Comment below if you saw this in in the theaters, or any memories that you maybe have of seeing it for the first time. Often people do gasp when they did back then when they saw the car crushing scene. Now, sadly, James Bond creator Ian Fleming, he passed away on August 12th of 1964, so about a month prior to the premiere of this film. Now, what I want to do now is I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to go ahead and pipe in the video that I shortened. So it's not the 25 minutes. You'll see it's about it's a couple of minutes. So let's watch it now.
Who are you?
Bond.
casting Oddjob proved to be no challenge at all.
I had to get some gangsters.
Look, he's gunning for trouble. The world's wiliest, toughest gentleman agent with a license to kill. 007. It spells on. Sean Connery in Ian Fleming's
Goldfinger.
It's January 1964, and James Bond has become one of the most popular characters in motion picture history. Producers Albert Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman have one goal: to create the biggest Bond yet. Ultimately, they create something more.
Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
The film's marketing campaign, orchestrated by ace publicist Tom Carlyle, is well underway when cameras roll in Miami. Goldfinger's shoot called for locations in 3 countries. The first scenes actually shot were in Miami at the Fontainebleau Hotel on January the 20th through the 24th, 1964. The Miami shoot also included the car-crushing sequence.
When we destroyed a brand new Lincoln Continental being crushed, the whole unit was speechless, all of us, because it was like part of ourselves being destroyed. I never forget it.
Good night, Mr. Bond.
Okay, so in that shortened making of, you see about just under 2 minutes, the narrator talks about some of the key things. The principal photography, first location was Florida, South Florida, as I mentioned earlier, and that was 60 years ago this month. So again, I'm kind of a date person. I like that aspect of it, and it's cool that we can put that line in the sand, so to speak, and say, hey, it happened the week of the 20th in 64, January. Now, I did not show the entire car crushing scene just because I edited what I had, but I want to go ahead and take a quick look at this now. And this is after they leave the one setting, which isn't even in the U.S. That's at Pinewood Studios, which we'll talk about. Once they get on the roads, that is South Florida. And, of course, Oddjob takes someone out, and then he drives to the metal recycling scrapyard, if you will. So let's do it. Okay. So what we're going to do here is I may skip ahead a little bit. This is the car scene. Many of you have seen this. They're tracking the car. There's the Thunderbird. He comes out of, this is a KFC. Someone has said it's still there. I haven't looked at all of these locations, but there's the T-Bird convertible. Again, part of the Ford product placement. We see the 64 sedan cut in the left turn there. Love watching these films again for the older cars and whatnot in here. I can't play it with the audio because of the copyright on it. There's a cool low shot of the car driving, green screening in. He pulls off on the side road. He does the dirty work. You can see the inside of the car. Again, we saw a couple of these short clips in the behind the scenes making of stuff. Living in Florida my entire life, again, you know, these roads and these highways and whatnot, they look almost the same how they make them. All of the overpasses and whatnot. Okay, so I'm going to pull this back here, and I'm just going to let it ride here. So turning left, you're going to see there's a hint there on that wall, which we'll talk about. The car, obviously, they cut away really quick. He pulls up. Right here is where the switcheroo. Can't even really tell. The camera jumps back. The white gentleman exits the car, walks away. And at that moment, boom, they have to have this pretty much spot on. They cut away there to a lower shot. The car is picked up. Again, this is not easy to watch. And you will see right in there, you can see the light coming through. You wouldn't have been able to see that if the engine was in there. It's placed into the car crusher. Again, this is very, very difficult to watch. I apologize. It is worth noting right here, and I'll try to pause this so you can see it. right there. That's the best shot. The door handles do appear to be painted blue. What that indicates to us is that the car was resprayed. I do understand people could say, well, hey, the Continental scripting, the keyhole cylinder is also not painted. They could either wipe that off. They could have taped it. If you're going to go that far, you could say, hey, the peak moldings aren't painted. The grill's not painted. The hood ornament's not painted. They would have taken some care to tape up the car, but it does appear right there that the door handles are painted. They would have resprayed this car to match it to the 64 because they're doing the switcheroo. Now, again, leave a comment. Let me know what you think so far of this episode. I certainly appreciate it. This segment is only a short while longer. And again, this is difficult knowing how hard these parts are to even get. It's just very, very tough to watch. Someone out there's probably got a little piece of this car, or maybe the family or someone that worked there. They probably went and grabbed a piece of it. Who knows? That would be pretty neat. Part of movie history, if you could verify it. This is kind of the part of the gag. I'll talk about a little bit later. I do think you can see the two different color paints here. And our understanding is that this was cut down so that it could fit into the Ranchero. I'll get into this later, but I think we all know that there's no way you could take the mass of a Lincoln, crush it into one little cube like this, and put it into the back of a Ranchero. It's just not going to happen. I do believe that is the same white gentleman. You can see his face there. When he gets in, they cut away. That is movie magic. And of course, there is Odd Job. Again, if you continue watching the scene, and here we see a good view, which I'm going to talk about later, where I think that this scene has incorrectly been referenced at the wrong spot. But when I do the overhead of this physical address here, where this took place, where we believe it took place, it's kind of hard because there should be a canal behind this. And I look at it and go, okay, there's probably a small possibility that it could have been recreated, this portion of it, in Pinewood Studios, but I highly doubt that, because we would see Odd Job there. And again, there's a white gentleman, probably this part of the second unit, that walks away from the 63 and gets in the Ranchero. This, of course, they're in the T-Bird, and they're like, basically the tracker is done. And here's where you see the Ranchero drive away. Again, if you look at this before and after, you'll see that there's not, the white wall tires and the hubcaps and things like that are different. So there's that portion of it. Let's continue on. Okay, so very, very tough to watch. And what I did there is I piped in some discussion over it because it's copyrighted, and I can't play that audio as well, because it'll get knocked down here off of YouTube. So something I want to talk about is now that we've watched that, and we're just like, my mind's blown every time I see that, I want to talk about the Ford product placement. So product placement is huge in 2024 as it relates to placing any products into a film or production. When you think about cars and trucks, gadgets like iPhones, restaurants, toys, pretty much anything, they're able to say, hey, the Hollywood studios are able to monetize off of that. If you go back to one of my favorite films of all time, Back to the Future, released in 1985, there's products in there, but even at that time, there wasn't really what there is today. Some of the behind the scenes stuff with Robert Zemeckis, who we'll talk about, that, we just went ahead and put, Tab, if you will, that soda that was popular in the 80s in there. And we just, did such and such, Mountain Dew or whatever. And it wasn't so much, it was like, hey, if they had approval and the company said, sure, do it, they just did it. And that's kind of like what happened here. Now, my thought, and I don't have any actual fact on this, you will find in this next bullet point, basically product placement wasn't what it is today, and companies really didn't see the value, or there wasn't the handshake deals, or there wasn't the money exchanging, if you will, right? It was just like, hey, it was more prestige. Maybe they saw a little value in it, But you would think that in the pre-production, they would have went to someone like Ford, and Ford was like, oh, man, that's cool. The other two films were successful. This is going to be a major motion picture. They're going to say, hey, it's got a budget of $3 million. Wow, sure, we'll truck some vehicles and provide those to the production. Did they know what was going to happen to the Lincoln? Who knows, right? Now, I watch the Knight Rider historians. I may not be the biggest Knight Rider fan, but I love their passion for that whole universe, right? It was only 4 seasons. They know every aspect of every car and every jump and all that stuff. But they often talk about a company called the Vista Group. And the Vista Group basically was created, my understanding, to assist the TV and film productions with being the middle person between the automakers and Hollywood. So if you think about like on a Knight Rider, you have this product placement of the famous Trans Am. You have the GMC General that's used as the command post, right? And then you have all kinds of other vehicles, and you had this Vista Group, and they were doing that kind of thing that obviously I don't think they were around in the 60s, but that they were probably the foundation for a lot of the handshake deals and deals that go down now to say, hey, we want to put the new Camaro in Transformers, or we want to put the new Mustang in such and such. Again, just to kind of lay some context. Now, there is an article, if you Google 1989 LA Times, the Vista Group, you'll land on this article, and I've got a couple of quotes here from this 89 article where it says, but car placement was not always such a big deal. Back in the 60s, Detroit automakers gave the process little thought and poured free cars into Hollywood like water. Often when one auto company would provide an entire fleet free to a studio, and that's probably what happened here. They just said, hey, it's prestigious. There's probably no money exchanged. Sure, we'll give you X amount of cars. Now, some of the cars I counted in the film, a lot of them are passerby cars, or, things that weren't necessarily hero cars or main placement. But there's a lot of Ford cars there, and I love watching these old films because there's a lot of old cars, obviously. Now, they also go on to say, there's a quote here, which I forgot to put in quotes, yet the automakers had little control over how the cars were used. Sometimes they didn't know whether the cars would end up in front of the camera or in the producer's latest lover, or with the producer's latest lover. So think about how the Lincoln was used in Goldfinger. Did the studio even know what was going to happen to it? Who knows? Now, the car crushing sequence, sadly, the James Bond film, as I mentioned, is etched into the Lincoln Continental universe, or as I refer to as the Lincoln verse, right? And I like just kind of using that. A lot of people say, metaverse and all that crap with Facebook. But, if you think about the universe of Lincoln and, these different films it was in, everyone talks about Perry Mason and Green Acres and all these cool shows and real popular stuff at the time. James Bond, this film really brought it to this blockbuster status, and it was pretty neat, even though it was crushed, that it does have this connection. Now, my preferences obviously don't crush it, do some Hollywood trickery, but we'll talk about that. Now, several cars were provided, from what I understand, by the Ford Motor Company, the Mustang that Tilly drives, the Ford Country Squire wagon to transport Bond from the airport to the stud ranch, the Thunderbird, which Felix drives, of course, that's there on the South Florida roads, and then the Continental, which Odd Job kills Solo in, and there is also a Lincoln convertible in the film, a couple Lincolns, 2 or 3. Now, as we kind of get into the meat and potatoes, the car crushing filming scene up to this point, if you go online and you do some checking, which I love movie site locations for all films. I'm not a James Bond, like a specific fan. I'm a fan of a lot of Spielberg films, like Back to the Future, but I love movie site locations. I actually lived for a period of my life, a couple of years, in a neighborhood by here where Edward Scissorhands was filmed. And that was a place where a lot of my friends lived when they were younger. So I enjoy this stuff. And I have a friend from California, Sean, all about Los Angeles. He does a ton of movie site locations, pop culture stuff, you name it. So if you do some digging, you're going to find this 007travelers.com website. This is an image from his site. Now, certainly, I'm not covering this portion to kind of say, hey, this guy's wrong or anything like that. I'm just pointing out sometimes I'll spend hours trying to figure these things out, as other people do. So I appreciate the dedication that, like a 007 Traveler website, a fan will go through to figure this stuff out. I do think it's slightly off, so we're going to get into that. But he has the location pegged at 3338 Northwest North River Drive, Miami 33142, or is it? Again, I think that we will find a discrepancy. Now, the couple things I wanted to mention in the film, we'll look at some of the screenshots. If you pause the scene, you will see the Atlantic Iron and Metal Company that is plastered on the wall. You see a wall here. You see train tracks, which Oddjob drives over. Technically, Oddjob wasn't driving at that time. I can tell you that because I've recently noticed that. Now, there is a person that claims, just in a comment, nothing to back this up, that the crew and location advisors in the past had said that the U.S. filming had the Lincoln drive-in and stop, and the crushing scene was filmed in England at Pinewood Studios. We know they used two different cars and so on and so forth, but I truly don't believe this, and this is why. I've never seen anything to substantiate this. There's also a person that has chimed in the past on this content that goes by David is Fishing, and he says to the person that claimed this guy's name was Martin Cole. He says, Martin Cole, you were definitely wrong. Wrong is in all caps. The car was crushed in Miami, Florida. It was my grandfather's scrapyard on Riverdale Drive, which he says, he says River Drive. Sorry. So, yeah, River Drive. Two different cars were used. The one he drove in is not the one that got crushed, which we know. They used another one with the engine removed, which we'll talk about, or we did talk about there in a moment ago. And the scrapyard is still there. The entire engine was removed at the scrapyard because they don't crush cars with the engines in them. That's why you don't see any fluids. My grandfather passed away in the late 70s. The pictures of them filming it, or had pictures of them filming it on his wall. Now, I did reach out to this individual. It's a long shot that I'll ever get those behind-the-scene photos. But if you paid attention in that short 1 minute and 50-second clip that I edited together in the past, in that clip, you will see one of the behind-the-scene photos, and that's kind of a raised photo, and you show the cameras faced at the car crushing machine. That's when they're doing the close-up of it. So, although you can kind of tell, like I almost think that they filmed it on different days, maybe. You know, they had the car drive in, and maybe that was the end of the day, and they come back the next day, and they kind of set up what they're going to do. Whether that happened or not, it doesn't really matter. It's, you know, you can, if you really analyze the scene, you can kind of see some of the differences. And we'll look at some of the photos here later that will also tie into the video that we looked at earlier. Now, another guy chimes in and says the Rich Nunez said, you were absolutely correct, David. So he's responding to the David is Fishing guy. I lived here in Miami all my life, and there is no way any of the scene was filmed in the UK. As I said in my reply to Martin, they do not have palm trees or Australian pines in the UK. He goes on to talk about a food fair, which I didn't see in what I was analyzing, so I won't mention that. So, again, we have someone that says, hey, it was my family's business. He had photos on the wall. And in that behind-the-scenes audio commentary, if you will, they mentioned January 20th through the 24th included, that was in Miami, and included the car crushing sequence. So I highly doubt. Now, my friend, I have a buddy, Noldy, who is a huge Superman fan, the biggest Superman fan I know in the world. And I believe he has told me in the past, I think it was Superman 3, which I loved growing up, by the way, with Richard Pryor, or do I have it mixed up? Was that Superman 4? You know which one I'm talking about. That I do believe that junkyard / metal recycling center scene, whatever I call it, a junkyard scene, that was filmed, I think, at Pinewood. I think I believe I saw some behind the scenes stuff recently where they talked about a lot of those cars were brought in to make it look like a U.S. junkyard and stuff. So certainly, could they have done it? Absolutely. But based upon what we know, we do believe that it was filmed in Miami, just not at this exact spot. Now, these are some of the photos from 007 Traveler. What stood out to me is there's a wall. If you look at the trees behind it, that is going to kind of line up with some of the trees behind where we see where the cranes are at. There's cranes here, and you go, hey, it's a recycling center. It's on the same street. There's the railroad tracks. All of that lines up, and you go, okay, well, here's where we're at. This is the production. They're driving into making a left-hand turn. You can see the train tracks there. We see Atlantic Iron and Metal Co. or Company. We could see here. Now, this screenshot is the clue that the location that has been posted prior is not 100% accurate. What we can see here is obviously the old school telephone poles. My dad was a telephone man in the 70s into for his whole entire career. He did a few different things, but it's always cool to see those old telephone poles. And he always talks about in film, he would, rest in peace to my dad, he would talk about in films, a lot of times they'd say, oh, look at the telephone poles, and they were power lines. So I'm rest in peace to my pops. It's hard to tell. That could be power lines. I know we have a bunch of those old glass insulators, and they were often up here in these areas. But yeah, now that I think about it, it's probably power lines. But you get what I'm saying. But there is a clue here, which we'll talk about here in a minute on where this was actually filmed. So basically, we watched the scene already. I was going to watch it here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over and I'm going to go off the screen, and we're going to go just, some screenshots that I took, and we'll break down a little bit further. The top is when the gentleman who's supposed to be Odd Job pulls in. We can see there's two cranes in the back there. We can see the tops of some of the trees, the greenery on the right. There's a couple of old cars. There's the piles of the junk and whatnot. So we can clearly see there is the flat glassed 64. 64 was a little bit longer. After it parks, and the gentleman that's playing Odd Job, again, this is not Odd Job. If you look at it, it's just a white gentleman. When he opens the door and he walks out, you could see the camera jumps back a little bit. It's a little bit different location. You can see it's heavy on the lighting here on the front grille. That's going to help disguise it a little bit. And my guess is no one at the time probably even knew. Certainly you probably had some Lincoln people that knew, but for the majority of people, they just watched the scene. It happened so quickly when he walks away, and then the rest happened. So again, I doubt most people would know, but again, you can look at the differences in the wheel covers, also known as hubcaps. The car is nocturne blue at this point, which we'll talk about as well. That's another fact I think we should talk about. But you can even see, like, for instance, look how close this car is here and where it's at with some of the debris right here. And you've got this thing right under the driver front tire, and you've got some white stuff here. You can look here, and again, it's none of that stuff is here. As close as this would be, you would see this, even though we're talking a different shot. We've got a shot right here, front 3/4. And then the bottom, we've got an elevated shot down. But clearly we can tell that is totally different vehicle. Now, if you're liking this content, please leave a comment. Even if you just go in and pick an emoji and like a thumbs up and hit send, that helps us here. So please do that if you're on YouTube. So before we go scene or clip by clip, what I did, it was easier for me just to take these on my iPhone in front of the screen, just because where I was consuming, you can watch this movie now if you have access to HBO Max. If you haven't bought it or you don't have it on DVD or VHS, you can watch it through HBO Max. But the little interface, every time I would go to do it, it had a line in it, and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to take photos of the screen. It's just as easy. This is a comparison, which we're going to get into in a moment, of where people think it was shot or where this scene took place. But if you look, there is a wall, and you go, okay, there's a wall, there's train tracks. That's what we have. So we're going to dive into that in a second. But as we get in here, again, this was at Pinewood Studio. So I think it was like 1 minute or 1 hour and 14 minutes and some odd seconds. I think towards the end of that minute is when they cut to the scene. And you've got the 64 Lincoln Continental. It's got the Kentucky plate. That's where they're supposed to, the setting of the film. So Kentucky plate, and then we can see boom, a 64. Remember, this car would have been like less than about 6 months old give or take, depending on what the production date of it was. We know the 64 model, I think, started August production. It was available in dealerships. I believe it was late September. I have the dates in my database. But, basically, let's just say September, October, November, December, January, 5 months old at this point. Wish we could see the odometer, but we can't in the shots. This is in Florida, on the highways down there in South Florida. I do believe they changed out the rearview mirror. I have a 64 Lincoln, so I should know. But the mirrors in these cars tend to kind of, you have to tighten the screw and put the little stuff on them. So mine's a little, wonky sometimes. But I think they changed that front or that rear view mirror to give this perspective with Oddjob. Also, it's worth noting that all of this other stuff is green screened in, whatever you wanted to call green screening back then. He was not in Florida from what I could tell. And so, again, they would have green screened this stuff. You can see the clock. We can see it's an AC car. It's an AM, FM radio. Or, excuse me, it's an AM radio, not FM. So it wasn't like a highly optioned car. This is where they turn off on the side road. Oddjob does the business. You can see the interior of the car. Again, I love seeing this stuff because there's not a lot of photos of these cars brand new. And certainly when you have a film like this, it's like a time capsule to a certain extent because, you're getting to see things on film, especially now. They probably would have never thought we'd be talking about this 6 years later in HD, 4K, all that stuff. Because when this stuff was shot on 35 millimeter film or whatever they used, that's a very, very high resolution. So it can be upscaled easily to, I think people have even said it's even a higher resolution than 4K to a certain extent when you really break down. But regardless of that, you get the point that I'm making. This stuff looks way better than it did, I'm sure, on the cinema screen back in the day. So again, we can see here down these famous Florida roads. I know these roads, the interstates kind of still look the same. There's Oddjob driving the car. This is where they turn into the Atlantic Iron and Metal Co. And as I alluded a little bit ago, the hint is right here on the information being incorrectly shared in the past, which I think we're going to get down to this. And again, thanks for sticking with me. I know kind of a lot of detail, but I love this stuff. You can see here the car's pulling in. We've got the green trees in the back. We've got the two cranes. And I just literally was like click, click, click on my iPhone just to kind of get the shots I wanted so we could talk about this. It was the easiest way to do it. I wanted to play it through HBO, but if you're ever recording your screen, the system knows, and it basically blanks it out. So you can't do a screen record. So this is the switcheroo. Again, you see the green tanks there. You see the pile. You see the two cranes, the old car there, some of the debris on. There's a white gentleman that's driving the car. They jump back here. The guy's got the top hat on. And you can see it's just a little bit different setting. There's no car on the right. Again, you could argue and say, well, yeah, it's just out of frame. But bottom line is whether they did it the same day. Again, you could argue that this location is a different location. I don't think that it is. I think the gentleman that even tried to claim that he's seen people mention that in the past, that, he talked about this was not a U.S., crane and all that. And granted, you can really break this stuff down even further. But the bottom line is we're pretty certain. I'm confident to say the car crushing scene took place in the Miami area, just not at the location that's been shared. And we'll break that down in a moment. So, of course, we've got the crane coming in here. And I'll jump a few ahead. Very tough to watch. Again, you guys watched this earlier where I gave some commentary. And I think I mentioned right here is where you can see through here. It's tough to see, and they did a good job of how they did this. But basically, the engine is removed, and the engine and trans would be removed, and you can kind of see up through here. You wouldn't really be able to see this light kind of coming through for the most part, but it's all black under there. You could even see this inner fender well is kind of dangling there. Still tough because there's so many good parts, and with these cars being more rare, it's tough to watch this. Now, I will tell you this. I think I mentioned this earlier. The blue, we're pretty confident this was not a Nocturne blue car. I do believe that they resprayed this to match it. That would have been a key component for the switcheroo. You could argue and say, well, Jason, if they painted the door handles, why did they not paint the door lock cylinder and the Continental badging? The Continental badging you could pop those off. They could have taped up this. They could have, even, then you could argue and say, well, the peak moldings weren't painted. How much did they take off? Did they, maybe tape up the peak moldings and just wipe away the paint on the lock cylinder? I don't know. But certainly if this car was resprayed, which I believe that it was, they did it, a quick, what I refer to as a Hollywood respray. They did that all the time on the Dukes of Hazzard cars and Knight Rider and whatever show, to cover up the blemishes. A lot of the stuff wasn't going to be seen on screen, so they thought. And again, just very, very tough to watch, especially in slow-mo, which I'm making you guys sit through. So we're going to keep going here, and we'll wrap this up here in just a couple minutes, so bear with me. What we're going to look at here is the car crushing scene. The car is now smashed. This is kind of like I don't know if you'd call it tongue-in-cheek, but this is kind of like a gag, I think is a better word. Now, what I can see here, to me, it looks like two different color paints. You've got the darker blue and you've got this lighter blue. Now, I know that's a little bit of a stretch, but I really do think if you watch this and you pause it, this looks like the Nocturne blue. This looks like the Bermuda blue. So we do also know for a fact, well, as far as we know, I've seen things where they said the production team had to cut that remaining metal that was. There's no way. I think we all agree there's no way an entire huge Lincoln Continental can be crushed and put into the back of a Ranchero. It's just not going to happen. So again, it's a little bit of a gag, and that's what happens. Now, this is not Odd Job. It's the same gentleman, I think, that walks away from the Lincoln. Of course, this is going to be like a second unit production type deal. So they can keep the high paid actors, off these kind of sets. But as soon as the gentleman gets in the car, they cut to this shot, and that is Odd Job. And of course, they probably green screen some of this stuff in. A couple more things you can see when the Ranchero drives away, you'll see that I think it has a white wall tire, but it doesn't in other scenes. There's a couple of Rancheros that were used, certainly. I think I got a couple of these shots here, and it's cool to look at some of the settings. Yeah, it's got white wall tires here, different rim setup, hubcap, whatever you want to call it. So there you have it. Now, so to summarize the car crushing scene, I think the facts included was a 64. We know changed to a 63. I'm convinced personally that all of the filming took place in Miami. We're going to look at the location here. In just a moment. Odd Job is not the person who gets back in the Ranchero. As I mentioned, if you look closely at it, you'll see it as a white male. The Continental had its engine removed. We can tell based upon what we've read online as well as underneath the car. The car had been partially cut so that it could fit into the Ranchero. I think we know that. There's no way a crushed Lincoln, even the weight of it, just wouldn't work. There was no real movie magic, or was there? There was a real 63 that was crushed. That was one of 28,095 built. I guess some movie magic, the Swapperoo. Again, I think most people that saw this in the cinema, they didn't know the difference. 2 Rancheros were used. Again, you'll see if you look at that scene. I'm confident we figured out the crush scene. So I think I kind of got some of my slides a little bit out of sequence here. So I'm confident I'm going to show you guys that the crush scene was at a different spot. So if you remember, or you watch this film, or you look at some of the screenshots or rewind here on YouTube, there's a 3200 on this wall. And this is 3200 on the same street. I'm confident that more than likely this was a business, and they decided maybe they had multiple spots on this road and they sold, or maybe it's a totally different place. But I would think as someone that kind of comes to town, you're like, oh, you go to the street, and then you're like, there's a metal recycling place, and you go to it. what I want to do now is I'm going to show you. Okay. So if you just type in 3338 NW Northwest North River Drive, this is where he went. And I could certainly see where somebody would say, hey, this is a wall. The car drove right in here. You know, back in the day, it circled around. You've got these trees. You've got cranes. This is the recycling place. What it doesn't match up to is the address in the film. So the address in the film is 3200. Now, I do understand, I don't work in Hollywood, but I understand what set dressings are. And I understand where somebody would say, well, hey, Jason, they probably just did a set dress and they put 3200 there for whatever reason. I definitely don't believe that. And I think the proof that is, if you look here, I believe right here is where it said 3200. Now, you got to remember, this is a little bit different shot. This is a Google car driving down the street. Basically, this gate right here would have been the opening where they would have driven and they would have turned in right here. They would have driven around this backside or whatever was here, and then the car crushing scene would have happened right over here. Now, I think the best evidence that I have for this is going to be that this wall here, I counted, I think there's like 10 blocks. It's about the same height, even though, again, this shot is a little bit different. They would have been a little bit lower shot. The wall kind of appears a little bit higher. But you have this wall in this section. There used to be a kind of an accessory structure here. This has been filled in where I think this is the grate. And then you have this wall here that has a slight bend to it. Okay. So follow me just for a second. If you look here, you see you've got this wall, the 3200s right over here. You've got this long wall. Again, I know it appears a little bit different. And down in this area, you've got this some sort of accessory structure. And I don't think this is the wall. This is actually the structure that butts up to it. Maybe there's like a little side wall there, but it basically jets up here. You've got this grate, and then you've got this wall here. If you look, there is a slight bend to it. I spent a lot of time. We'll jump back to Google in a second. You've got this long wall. It kind of jets up a little bit. I believe this is where that accessory structure, and there's a clear bend right here where this wall, part of this wall still exists. So I am very confident on that. Again, this is where I break down the E versus the H and 63 versus the 64 color. And again, I promise we're going to wrap this up here in a second. Now, when we go back here, again, I feel like the camera was right over here. The car turns in. There is a gate that's closed now here. And you see clearly from this angle that there's that little bend in the wall right there. This is 3200. That's the same that we can see in the film. If we go back here, we can see there is a channel behind it. You have these trees, which I believe is the trees that you see. And then it's hard to tell, but obviously there would have been an open space behind those. But I do believe if you look here, there is a street light, and right in, I think it's right here is where the wall is at, or where the opening would have been, where they would have turned in at that time. You could see here, again, this is where an accessory structure used to be, and then you could see this bend clearly from Google Maps. The car would have turned in right over here. The 3200 would have been here. It would have pulled in. And let's say there was like the mound of junk or whatever, it would have pulled in here. It would have circled around. The camera crew would have been here. They would have been facing out, which you would have the cranes, the pile of the stuff, and then you'd see the trees in the background. I don't think there's any other way to spin it. Again, if you look at the two locations, this is it. It matches the 3200. We can see the wall. If this wall was still not there, it would make it difficult, but I can tell you this. The train tracks are there. You've got the bend in the wall. We can see where the accessory structure, and if you go back to here, it's kind of hard to see in some of these. Okay, where the bend is at, it's hard to see in this image. Obviously, images have gotten better, but right here, you see there's a little bit difference in this wall. I think this is where that grate was in the past. I'm not 100% sure on the grate. You know, was it just filled in? You can see there are some gaps in these and whatnot. But here you go. Here's I went around this thing a bunch, and I never got to this view, because if you just move a hair down the road, it changes. This is where the wall would have went. And remember what I said, how I think there was this little wall that goes right here. This is where it steps up. This is where that accessory structure would have been. And this wall at some point was a little bit higher, and you could see where it bends back slightly. So there you have it. And again, one more time, if you were going to this location, I can tell you this right here. This is where you can see where the gate used to be, and it's right behind where this light pole is at now. So if I were going to take a photo or whatever, and I knew that this was where the original opening, I do believe this is exactly where the car went, and it was crushed right over here. Now, if I could ever touch base with the person that had the family member that owned it, I could maybe confirm to say, hey, did he sell it? I can maybe look back at old records. I know people will do that sometimes to see, hey, was this property sold? When was it sold? Did they own both properties and they just went down there? Did another scrap place open? At the end of the day, I'm not going to invest any more time in it. I just think it was intriguing to cover that. So again, in closing, I'll say this. I do believe it was a 60. Well, we know it was a 63. It was probably Bermuda blue. It was resprayed to the Nocturne blue to match the 64. There was a convertible as well that's used in the film. Many of you probably know this. This is probably the 64. Don't know if they use the same one in the UK at Pinewood Studios in South Florida. I don't know if we could figure that out. I want to wrap this one up. That does it for Lincoln Addict Podcast episode 36. We covered the Goldfinger film details. So some of the key things. We celebrated the anniversary. So again, 60 years ago at the time of this episode launching back in good old January of 1964. We obviously added some commentary to the car crushing scene. We determined what I believe to be the actual scene location. Let me know what you think. We came to the conclusion it does appear the car was resprayed, which I truly believe that. We came to the conclusion the entire Lincoln would not fit into the rear of the Ranchero. Rest in peace, Ian Fleming, Sean Connery, and all involved with this amazing film. Rest in pieces, I guess I could say, to the 63 that was crushed in January 64. Thank you guys so much. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, leave a thumbs up if you can, leave a 5-star rating if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you guys so much. Stay on the rise, everyone. Take care. ODB, we out of here. Peace.
All right, folks, that does it. I flipped the camera around. We're checking out my movie marquee with some of my Lincoln collectibles, I would say. And again, I want to thank you guys and ladies so much for watching and listening. I do want to thank Devious Customs, Colorado Custom Wheels. You heard me talk about steel rubber at the beginning. Seal your car with steel. If you're ever looking to buy one of these cars or you're looking to refurb your car, listen, I know this stuff costs a little bit of money, but sealing these cars, making them weatherproof, making sure that there's no wind noise coming in is critical. Again, Steel Rubber, STEELE rubber.com. Certainly appreciate them, and we've got the sticker right up here to prove it. I also want to thank Griot's Garage and AccuAir, ACCU-Air, AccuAir.com. Again, that's going to be for the person that wants to add air suspension, maybe to their custom Lincoln, or they even have products for Jeeps. So if you're off-roading and you want to adjust the height of your vehicle, you can certainly do that with AccuAir products. But all of these fine companies have said, hey, we'll help you out. We'll help out your listeners. We'll help out your viewers. If they hit us up, let us know that you listen to Lincoln Addict Podcast, and we'll do the best we can to help them out. So I don't get anything for free from these companies whatsoever. I just take pride in pushing the companies that have fantastic products and potentially are going to help you in the future on your ride or project. So thank you again so much. If you like the new production and some of the production value associated with this, let me know what you think. All of the comments, I'll do my best to go back and respond to each one of them. And if you're on an Apple device or Spotify, any way that you're listening to the episode audibly, please go in. If you can, leave a rating. A 5-star rating is much appreciated. If you want to go a step further, leave a comment, and I will try to get to some of those here in the future on the podcast. So much more in store for Lincoln Addict Podcast as we move through 2024, including aesthetics of these different year Lincolns and so on and so forth. Lastly, again, if you're new to the channel here, check out the catalog of content that we have. whether it's an audio podcast episode here on YouTube or so many other great videos that have helped many people. Thank you guys so much, and the ladies as well. Take care, everyone. And again, Happy New Year. Let's keep 2024 on the rise, y'all. Let's do it.